Um, Traditionally, I think I should say Boker Tov, good morning. A morning in Jerusalem. I thought I might start with my own first association of thinking about a morning in Jerusalem. I assume that you all know this building on both of those images. This is the old BITL building, the historic BITL Academy of Arts and Design here in Jerusalem building. It's on BITL Street in the city center of Jerusalem. And this is where I studied 30 years ago, precisely 30 years ago, I started studying here in this building. And this is where I started my journey in design, in art, 30 years ago. While I was studying at BITL, I rented an apartment, a room basically, in Schatz Street, which is right across the street. We'll come back to Professor Schatz later. He's the founder of the school, of the academy, of the BITL Academy. Now, the aerial distance between this window and my window at home was, I think, something like probably 50 meters, maybe less. And my memory of mornings in Jerusalem is that every Wednesday, 8 o'clock in the morning, we had a class in this room up there. And every Wednesday, I think I left home late and arrived on time. So this is my memory. And to say a word about myself, I was asked to introduce myself. So after studying at BITL, I had my own studio working for different clients in various fields, mostly in working with cultural institutions. I focused on Hebrew typography. And for the last 20 years, I'm teaching at BITL. I was the chair, the head of the visual communication department. And for the last 3 years, I'm the president of the academy. So we'll come back to BITL. This is the same building we've seen before on the right hand here. And I want to say a few words about the school, about the academy. And mostly I want to say a word about BITL's view, looking backwards to history, to heritage, to tradition. And I'll talk more specifically about Hebrew typography, the Hebrew alphabet, the script. And then I'll say a few words about my own work, and specifically about a typeface I've designed entitled Noam Text. But it's really about looking backwards and forwards, looking into tradition. And by the way, okay, this is the same window, and this is Professor Schatz that I mentioned before. He was a visionary guy, kind of strange. You can see he was a kind of a Michiganer walking, Orientalist walking with this white robe. But again, a word about BITL. So BITL is the oldest institution in the country. I don't know if you know about it, but we were established 1906 in Jerusalem by this guy, by Professor Schatz. And this is how it looked like at the beginning. And I think what's really interesting is this connection, this relation between the past and the future, between what we were used to be and what we're looking and we want to be in the future. And I think this characterizes BITL ever since. It's this double view, looking backwards to the past and forward to the future. As we want to make the world better, to improve, and to try to contribute as designers, as artists, as architects to the world in general, to Israel and to Jerusalem specifically. And this is a footage of Professor oops, sorry. Just a second. Okay, so this is Professor Schatz welcoming guests at BITL in the 1920s. We gave up the tradition of the camels, but we still like to welcome guests at BITL. And it gives you a glimpse, an idea of how it looked like back then. Okay, so say goodbye to Professor Schatz. Okay. It is also worth mentioning, except for talking about the timeline and looking into history, I want to say a word about the geographic space, the political space, the cultural space where we are working and living and creating. And I think one of the main anchors of BITL's vision is localism, is really working and creating art, design, and architecture that sprout and grow and stem out of this place. The place in the very broad meaning, looking at the history of this place, the geography, the climate, the light, the landscape, politics, everything that surrounds us must be a part of what we do, of what we create. And I think it is important for us, it's crucial for BITL to work in this here in Jerusalem, not forgetting that this is the view from my window. And we are not in Europe, we are not in the US, we are here. Our place is Israel, our place is Jerusalem, and being in Jerusalem is crucial. It's an essential part of who we are, it's an essential part of the DNA of the institution. So, looking at Hebrew typography, I said a few words about BITL, about our place, about Jerusalem, the history. I want to focus about and talk about Hebrew typography. I won't go into a long explanation or description of the history of Hebrew type. It's for another lecture. But just to give you a very extremely brief idea, those are the hidden scrolls from the Dead Sea. And this is the earliest example we have of the Hebrew script, the Hebrew alphabet, earliest dated. Those are from the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD. And another two examples I want to show you. One is the Ashkenazic type that was developed in Europe in Middle Ages, Northern Europe mainly, and the Sephardic type, the Sephardic style that developed in the southern part of Europe, mostly in Spain, Italy, Portugal. And those two styles, the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic, were the main influences on the development of the Hebrew type, of the Hebrew letter. Again, we can talk a lot about this, but this is just a sort of a brief basis. Most of the, I want to talk specifically or say a few words about this typeface, font. This is called Frank Rule, and probably familiar with this. This is it was designed by Raphael Frank, 1908 in Leipzig, in Germany. And it is the most common Hebrew typeface in use ever since it was designed, which is quite an interesting and unique phenomenon. Because if you think about typefaces, each one is a bit different, and each one has a different voice. They are used to express different ideas, different atmospheres, or visions, and if we all use the same typeface always, and this is used for almost all books printed in Hebrew and almost all the newspapers and magazines that are printed in Hebrew, that means that we all use and we all have the same voice. We don't have variations, we don't have different tones, it's always the same voice. So it's quite an interesting phenomenon, it's unique, quite unique for us, for Israel. But it is the convention. It's the typeface we all know. When we think, someone learns Hebrew, when you think about Hebrew, probably what you see is this. If you imagine an aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, then you imagine this aleph. But before we go into details, I want to say something general about typefaces and fonts. And it is interesting to note that we are using fonts every second of our life, every second. It's all around us, whether it's books, newspapers, your smartphone, signage on the street. It's all around us. However, we never stop to think a second about how it came about, who designed it, if anyone ever designed a typeface. It's sort of transparent for us. So what is a typeface, actually? What are we trying to do when we design a new font, a new typeface? Basically, it's about two things. A typeface is a series of abstract forms. In the case of Hebrew, we have 22 letters and another 5 for final forms. So it's 27 different symbols. And what we're trying basically to do is to do two things in parallel. One is to make this series of forms look alike. We're trying to make them a family. They have to have a similar DNA. They have to look to have a similar kind of a visual code. Imagine that well, in a moment I'll show you, if you take a different letter, here the fourth letter from the right, from another typeface, then you all see that it makes a difference. Something is strange here. Again, if I go back, this is the original one, and this is a letter from another typeface. And it's very clear that it has a different visual code, different visual DNA. But really, thinking about tradition, generally speaking about designing typefaces, it's all connected very closely to tradition, because if we leave the tradition, if we go away, if we create forms that are too different from convention, too far away, too unique, then what happens? Then you cannot read it. So you have to be always very close to tradition, to convention, in order to be readable, to create something that is readable, easy to read. And therefore, we have a very, very narrow or limited space of creation, of innovation when creating new typefaces. So one thing is really to create this code, this visual code, this consistency, this coherent system. This is another version of inserting a different typeface into this string of letters. But the other thing is in a way the opposite, because what we want to do is to create this series of letters as different as possible one from the other. Why? Because we want to be able to read them. If they're too similar, if they look alike too much, then it's difficult to read. Look at those two. I mean, most of you, I guess, I assume, can read Hebrew, so it's easy for you. But if you look at it for a moment, actually they're very close. And mostly, we look at them at this size, or even smaller, right? When you read a book or a newspaper, they're very small. What's the difference between those two letters? It's just the tiny, tiny, tiny bit that makes the difference. So it's really about, on one hand, making them look alike and be similar to one another in order for them to become a family, a group, a consistent group of forms. But on the other hand, you have to make them different from one another. So look at, again, those two. They're very similar, and there are many, many other combinations in Hebrew. Just think about bet and chaf, chet and hey, vav and zayin, so on and so forth, many of them. So it's this tension between those two polars, the resemblance and the difference, differentiation. When I started creating this typeface called Noam Text, I was looking at the Frank rule. This was my reference. I wanted to conduct a journey or a creation that on one hand looks at history, at tradition, looks at the convention, but on the other hand create something that will be new, innovative, different, lighter, more contemporary, and above all, I was trying to make it more readable. Going back to the Frank rule, I wanted really to create an alternative to this typeface, but I also wanted to create multi-script or a dual script type family. A type family that holds both Hebrew and Latin. This need of inserting Hebrew into English or French or German, any language that uses the Latin script, this need is very common. We do it a lot here in Israel. We have both Hebrew within a flow of English and vice versa. We also have a lot of dual script use for books, magazines, and the such. If you look at those two texts, on the right hand you have Noam text, on the left hand is Frank Rule. You see the difference in texture and in color. But again, if we look generally at the differences between the Hebrew and the Latin script, they are very different. It's not an easy task looking at those two scripts and trying to find a way to harmonize between them. Differences are quite substantial. The first one would be the stress. As you can see, the difference between the thicks and the thins, if you look at Hebrew, you can see that it's very horizontal, whereas the Latin is very vertical. This is a very fundamental difference. Then directionality, obviously, we write Hebrew from right to left. Latin is written from left to right. But it's also the directionality of the forms. So if you look at those forms, you can see that most of the Latin letters are open in the direction from left to right, and then in Hebrew it's the opposite. And then obviously we don't have uppercase letters, or we have very few extenders, those parts that go above the line and below the line. They're very common in Latin, very rare in Hebrew. And above all, the Latin script uses a lot of circular forms, round forms, whereas in Hebrew we have none. So they're very different, and the attempt to make them work together, to harmonize between them, is quite a challenge. One of the things that was very clear to me when I started to work is that I need to find a way to make them really harmonize in terms of overall look, overall feeling, overall texture, and not to look at the details. So it's not about taking a detail from one script and copying it to another, but you need to take a different approach. One thing that was really important for me was to develop them both from scratch together. There are quite a few Hebrew typefaces that were designed as a derivative of a Latin typeface. So someone took a Latin font and made a Hebrew companion or a counterpart. In my case, it was developing both from scratch together. It was extremely crucial for me to make them authentic, each one to its relative script. And not, so to speak, to betray the tradition. We have many examples of Latinized Hebrew typefaces that neglect our tradition, the history of the Hebrew script, and it is something that I wanted to avoid. I wanted to make them look, each one completely authentic to its own history and tradition, and nevertheless, they should work together. They should, they should be part of the same system. In a way, it's a bit like thinking of two brothers or sisters in a family. They're not identical, but you can clearly see that they are part of the same family. At the beginning, it was very difficult. I will show you some difficult images, tough images. This is really horrific, let me tell you. It's terrible. This is how it started. A bit embarrassing, but it's worth seeing the journey that I took. This is all from the very beginning. Slowly it developed. Slowly it becomes similar to what it became. It's a very, very long journey, very Sisyphean, unceasing search again and again and again, endless search, looking at more and more details, checking again and again, comparing. Those are just a tiny bit of the sketches I had along the way. This is how it looks like at the end. This is the typeface. I think, I hope you can see that it is clearly connected to our tradition, but at the same time, it's different, it's fresh, it's contemporary, it's clearer, lighter in weight, and it's, I hope it's quite readable and legible. This is the heavy weight, this is the Latin italic. This is vocalized Hebrew, the Nikud, made specifically, especially for this typeface. This is the entire character set in Latin. Again, the bold, the italic. The typeface is pan-European, meaning that it supports many, many different languages that use the Latin script. Many of those interesting and nice forms, symbols, currency symbols, and others, and again in Hebrew. But as I mentioned before, one of my main goals, perhaps the main goal, was really enabling a designer to interlace, to interweave a word or a sentence in English or French or German or Italian into a flow of Hebrew. And I don't know if you've noticed the English in the Hebrew, but it's in there. So I go back. This was one of my main goals designing this typeface. And the other one was, again, it's hard to see in this size, but there's English in the Hebrew and vice versa. I spoke about, or I mentioned before, letter differentiation. So this was also an interesting and an important part of the design, looking at the differences of similar letters and making them as different as possible. Again, thinking of them as very tiny. Designing special vocalization marks for special cases, special punctuation marks for Hebrew, which is a very rare thing. You don't find it usually. Again, it's about being honest and being thinking about your own identity, your own tradition, not accepting the idea that we can use Hebrew with Latin punctuation marks. We need our own. So this is one example. The other example is creating a numeral set for Hebrew. So if you look at this piece of text, there are many numerals, numbers. They all very well harmonized into the text. And if you look at this is the common use, this is what you see normally, is using those big numbers. This is my suggestion here, proposal. Again, a different set for the Latin, a different set for the Hebrew. This is how it looks like all together. And eventually it was really about creating this system that holds both scripts harmoniously, effortlessly, perfectly working together. Before concluding, I want to show you two examples, two projects that are based on heritage and tradition. The first one is something that started as a graduate project at the Visual Communication Department at BITL. It was created by Ariel Shekel. And at the beginning, I was a mentor, then I became partner in crime, co-designer, and we made it happen together. You might be familiar with this. This is the current symbol and branding system of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. But I'm showing you this because one of the things we did was creating a new typeface for the university, a proprietary typeface, which is this. It's only the Hebrew. And this typeface was, what I tried to do is really to express the history of the institution, the Hebrew University. And I did that echoing an existing typeface that the university uses around the campuses on the signage system they have. So we found this existing typeface, probably designed around the 1950s, and sort of designed a new typeface that was based on the same idea. But the typeface that they use, the university uses in the signage, that was designed in the 1950s, is based in its own right, based on models from antiquity, from the first centuries, BC or AD, and basically an antique model of Hebrew. I'm showing you this because it was a kind of an application of my knowledge and my work in researching the history of Hebrew type and the tradition we have, and applying it on contemporary design, in this case with Hebrew U. This is how it looks like today. And the other project, and the last project I'll show you, is BITL Ivrit. It's the Hebrew Center in Rishon LeZion. It's a center, cultural center, focusing on the story of the Hebrew language. And as the main idea or the main focus of this center is the Hebrew language, we thought using the Hebrew script, the Hebrew alphabet, as the identity, the brand, was a good idea. The Hebrew script is the expression of the language, is the visual expression of the language. And this project was done with designer Kobi Levy. And so we chose to do this, to use Hebrew type. This says BITL Ivrit, Hebrew house. But the other thing we did is to create different variations for the logotype. So this is one, and this is based on the Ashkenazic model that I have shown you at the beginning. And this is another version based on the Sephardic version style. This is based on the Oriental style, 9th to 10th century. This is the Frank rule we've seen before. And this is a modernist type called Miriam. And the idea was really looking at the history and enabling this change and variation of the logotype and the brand. Again, taking and looking into tradition and using tradition, traditional forms, and make them contemporary, make them relevant, make them effective. So really to conclude, going back to BITL historic building, this is a lino cut I did myself when I was a student on my first year at BITL 30 years ago. And I think what I was trying to say is that understanding, studying, researching history, and most importantly, respecting tradition, our tradition, all those are really crucial for the design and the creation of valid, sustainable, effective, durable, high-quality contemporary art and design. So, yeah, I think I forgot to tell you that traditionally I'm not very creative in the morning. I'm more of a night person, but hopefully I conveyed the message. I thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any question, it will be a pleasure to answer. Thank you.
Questions?
Hello, I have a little question. Is there some letter in the sign of Hebrew University? This symbol, like sun, symbol in Hebrew? No, is there any letter inside?
Yeah, there is the letter, well, maybe we can go back quickly to that, so you see it. Yeah. The original symbol of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem was designed by Zelig Segal, and it was originally based on two letters, Aleph and Ain, Universita Ivrit. It's hard to tell. I'm not sure if you knew that, if you've seen it, but it's Aleph. The Aleph is here, and then the Ain is this. This is a new version that we've created based on the original version. But yes, there are two letters in there.
Are you creating different fonts or different presentations for digital as opposed to print?
Obviously, there's difference. We look at the medium as part of the brief for the design process. More and more, needless to say, more and more is focused on digital medium, on screens. And when we design a typeface, if it's meant mostly to be used on screen, it's different than it is from print. It's mostly about resolution and the way the font is rendered. However, it is worth mentioning that things have changed, and today, as screens are very good and the resolutions goes up and up, then it's not such a difference anymore. It was very, very important, say 5 years, 10, a decade ago or so, and some of the typeface designed at the time were really meant only focused for screen or print. Today, it's not that important anymore, but still, it's a factor when you think about the design.
רציתי לשאול בעולם שככה כל מקום, ארגון שרוצה שיהיה לו לוגו בולט בכל מקום שהוא שם אותו, למה בעצם לקחו את הלוגו האחרון שהיה לאוניברסיטה העברית לפני מה שיצרתם, הוא היה מין נקודה אדומה כזאת, והאלף הייתה בצבע לבן, למי שזוכר, אלף עין. ולמה בעצם החלטתם להוריד את הרקע הזה וליצור שיהיה על רקע לבן, וגם עם הפרופורציות של הטקסט יחסית ללוגו שהוא מעורך, הטקסט הוא לרוחב, ואז בעצם זה מאוד מקטין אותו, וכששמים אותו, אם יש כמה שותפים לאיזשהו אירוע, אז הסמל של האוניברסיטה דווקא נעלם ומאוד קשה לקרוא את הטקסט. אני מקווה שזה היה מובן.
טוב, זה היה כל הסיפור של מיתוג אוניברסיטה העברית במשפט אחד, בשאלה אחת, כך שיש הרבה מאוד מה לומר על זה, אבל אני אנסה בקצרה. ראשית, רק לשאלת המבנה ההוריזונטלי או ורטיקלי, יש כמה וכמה גרסאות, וכשמעצבים מותג, למרות שזה לא היה הנושא של השיחה שלי היום, אבל כשמעצבים מותג, השאיפה היא בדרך כלל ליצור מצב שיש בו הרבה מאוד וריאנטים, כלומר שאפשר לממש את אותה רוח, את אותו מותג, במקרים שונים, ביישומים שונים, באילוצים שונים, גם בשאלות של גודל, מבנה, מידיום, כפי שהוזכר קודם, וכיוצא באלה. אז זו נקודה אחת. מדוע עשינו את השינוי? מסיבות שונות ומגוונות, אני אזכיר אולי רק כמה. אחת זה שכשאנחנו נכנסנו לתהליך הזה לפני, נראה לי משהו כמו 5 שנים, היו אין סוף מופעים שונים של לוגו האוניברסיטה העברית. זאת אומרת, עשינו את המחקר הזה, אספנו, אני אומר אין סוף, זה עשרות ביטויים שונים. כל מקום שהסתכלת עליו זה נראה אחרת. זה היה וריאציה כזאת וכזה, בעיגול, בריבוע, באדום, בירוק, בקטן, בגדול, הכל היה שם, והיה ברור שנדרשת האחדה, צריך לייצר איזה סדר ובהירות בתהליך הזה, או בנראות של האוניברסיטה. הסיבה שעשינו את מה שעשינו ספציפית הייתה שחשבנו שנכון לחזור, אם תרצו, לחזור למסורת, לחזור להיסטוריה, לחזור למודל המקורי של סמל האוניברסיטה, שהוא סמל בסך הכל ידוע, הוא מותג חזק, אבל לעדכן אותו, כלומר לקחת את המקור כפי שהיה, לא בתוך העיגול ולא מוקטן ולא עם הצבע שהיה שם, הבורדו שהיה שם, לחזור לסמל המקורי, אבל לעדכן אותו בעיקר בשתי רמות מרכזיות. אחת זה, פחות רואים את זה, אבל לדייק את הצורה, לחדד אותה בהתאם כל מיני היבטים, חלקם גם פונקציונליים שהוזכרו פה, של גודל ומדיום, אבל גם לפרק אותה וליצור את המרחב הצבעוני הזה, שהוא במידה רבה מוזאיקה, זאת אומרת איזשהו פסיפס שמעיד על ריבוי, על מגוון, על ריבוי קולות, על פלורליזם מחקרי, תרבותי, אקדמי, ועדיין שומר על הנראות של הסמל המקורי, אבל נותן לו נופח ונראות עכשווית וחדשה שמספרת את הסיפור של האוניברסיטה כפי שהאוניברסיטה רוצה להיראות ולהישמע. זה גם די חריג ביחס ללוגויים או למערכות מיתוג של מוסדות אוניברסיטאיים או אקדמיים גם בארץ וגם בעולם. הביטוי הצבעוני הזה, המגוון, הוא מהלך יחסית נדיר וחריג. ברוב המקרים מוסדות מהסוג הזה משתמשים בצבע אחד, הם לא בוחרים במערכת מגוונת כזו.
With English you created a italic version, but Hebrew you decided to leave that italic, even though I know maybe traditionally Hebrew doesn't have a official italic, but is that the reason?
So first I need to, בעברית או באנגלית? בעברית, אני אגיד בעברית שהשאלה נגעה למה שנקרא italic, לאות הנטויה, לסגנון הנטוי, שהוא מאוד נפוץ במרחב של האות הלטינית, של הכתב הלטיני, וכולנו מכירים אותו, והוא לא קיים בעברית. מדוע לא עשיתי את זה? אז קודם כל התשובה היא מדוע עוד לא עשיתי את זה. זה יקרה. אבל הסיבה היותר מהותית היא שזה אתגר מאוד מאוד גדול, מכיוון שכפי שציינת, במסורת של האות העברית זה לא קיים. אין לנו את המצב הזה של, יש לנו דוגמאות, כשמסתכלים על קליגרפיה העברית ועל היסטוריה של האות העברית, יש לנו דוגמאות של אותיות נטויות ימינה או שמאלה, אגב, לשני הכיוונים, אבל כל המקרים האלה, א', הם לא נפוצים, הם די נדירים, אבל ב', חשוב מכך, הם לא משמשים כמשקל משני, כלומר, כשאנחנו משתמשים באיטליק בלטינית, באנגלית, בצרפתית וכן הלאה, אנחנו משתמשים בו כדי להגיד משהו, אנחנו מסמנים את זה או לציטוט, כציטוט, או שם של משהו, יש לזה שימוש פונקציונלי, כן, יש לזה, זה מטרה, נאמר כך. הדוגמאות שאנחנו רואים בעברית הם לא כאלה, הם מצבים שבהם הם לא נגזרת של משקל, מה שנקרא upright, כן, ניצב, אלא הם גרסה בפני עצמה, מקומות שבהם אנחנו מזהים עברית שהיא נטויה לכאן או לכאן. האם אנחנו זקוקים לזה בעברית? זו שאלה טובה, זה כלי משמעותי עבור מעצבים, עבור כל מי שכותב, מקליד באנגלית או כאמור בשפות שעושות שימוש באות הלטינית, ואין לנו את זה בעברית. בעברית בדרך כלל מוצאים כל מיני פתרונות דחק, קו underline מתחת או איזשהו משקל אחר כדי לבדל ולייצר פער בין האות הרציפה לבין משהו שאנחנו רוצים להדגיש. כן, זה נדרש, זה אתגר מרתק, אינטלקטואלי, יש לא מעט, לא, אין הרבה, אבל יש אי אלו יוצרים, מעצבים היום בישראל שמחפשים את הדרך, מחפשים איך לעשות את זה. זה נושא מרתק, אני חושב, למצוא את האיטליק העברי.
Professor, thank you very much. Just a question, I'm interested to hear about your process. You showed us the intensity and length of time and all those sketches, and I think specifically for the creative minds in this room and for many of us in our process, especially also in the days that we live where to innovate and originate must be so detailed and fine, and one needs so much discipline and patience. Are you able to speak a little bit about how you kept going through that, what I see and sometimes feel as a very tedious process? Thank you.
Well, it's a very good question. It's a very, I would say, deep introspection of the creative process. And I think in most cases, creative process, I mean, sometimes it goes very quickly, but in most cases, it's a long process. From my own experience and my own view, working in graphic design and in typography, in most cases, it was a process made with a client, with a brief that came from someone else, a need, something that I had to work with or to support, to help someone with the mission, with the goal. And it's a bit of a different process. In that case, in a way it's easier because you create those sketches or those proposals. It takes the time, it's a long work, but then you go to your client, you get a response or a reaction. Sometimes it goes quickly, sometimes it's not. Very often you have a sketch or a proposal you think is brilliant, you think it's done, you found the solution, you go to the client says, no, it's not at all, it's no good, I hate it. Okay, you go home, you hate the client, you don't know what to do, you go back to the drawing board, you start again, work again, go back to the client, then again, the same thing happens sometimes. But eventually, if you succeed, you look backwards, retrospectively, after a week or a year or a decade, and you know for yourself that the end result is much, much better than what you thought was brilliant at the time. Meaning that it's an ever-evolving process. There's never an end for a creative process, never. I mean, you can always go back and continue and make it better, make it different. So it's an endless process. With typeface design, it's a bit different because in most cases you work with yourself. You have no client. It's a product when you finish, you put it on the shelf, you sell it. People are using it, but you don't have a client. So in a way, it's much more difficult. It's between you and yourself. And in my case, it was a very long process, which was bad and good at the same time because I had the time to go back and forth, to leave it for sometimes a year or so, and then I came back, looked at it. It looked horrific, obviously, after a year. Then you start again, and it might also worth mentioning that I think for every creative, your own view, when you look at your own piece of work, whether it's typeface design or a piece of a dance piece or music or whatever, it's always, you look at it and at one point you think it's great. You're really proud, you're happy with what you did, you feel you did it, you did the new thing, you did something that no one else did before you, and a moment later or a second before, you hate it. You look at it and say, it's nothing. There's so many things like this that people have done before, and I think it's always like that. And in a way, I think this is the engine. This is what drives you forward. This is where motivation comes from, and it's always to try to make a new thing, something that no one ever did before you. So Marcel asked me to say a few words about the new campus, BITL's new campus. Okay, I'll take an hour, okay, or an hour and a half for this. No, it's a long story, but I'll try to say a few words about it. BITL, as you've seen, is a very old institution, the oldest in the country, and we have been always in Jerusalem. Started at the very center of town on BITL Street with the historic building that I've shown you. But we are now located and based mostly on Mount Scopus, on Har HaTzofim, which is dislocated far away. I sometimes say that this is the ivory tower in its worst meaning. It's not the right thing, especially not for an art and design academy. And we are now, well not now, but soon relocating back to the city center of Jerusalem, building a magnificent, amazing new campus. It will be located in Migrash Arusim on the Russian compound, right behind City Hall, very close to the old city, and it's basically in the epicenter of the city. It's the beating heart of the city. It's right between the different Jerusalemite communities, again, close to the Palestinian Arabic community, the old city, very close to Mea Sha'arim, to the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, very close to Musrara, and to other parts of the city, and it is really in the very center. And this is not by coincidence. It's part of our idea, it's part of our mission to be in the beating heart of the city, to live the city, The building is extremely transparent, and it is transparent in order to be open and inviting and welcoming to the community. We think of events, of exhibitions, of course, in our galleries. The library will be open to the Jerusalemite community, and it is really a main part of the creation of this new campus. It is also important for us, the transparency is important for us to remind our students where they are, in order for them not to think that they create and work in New York or London or Zurich. They are in Jerusalem, they have to see it. They have to leave the city. And it's also perhaps worth mentioning that the new campus is in short walking distance from the historic building. And actually it's not very far from here as well. So it's all about creating a new city campus with different anchors in the city, spread around the city. And it's not only the activity that will happen in those different anchors, but also the traffic, the circulation between those buildings or anchors in the city that will transform the city. And it's really about, this is, in my view, not only in my view, this is the most important project today in Jerusalem. It's a substantial building, it's 40,000 square meters, and it's about revitalizing and renewing the city center of Jerusalem and changing it completely from an urban point of view. This is the most important project today in Jerusalem. And hopefully in 4 years' time, October 2022, you're all invited. We're there.